Good luck, San Francisco. You know, I had to put a picture of one of the greatest running backs on the planet, Roger Craig. Why he's not in the Hall of Fame, I have no idea. So ask yourself that. Any football fans here? Okay, cool. Exactly. Give this man a prize. The first thousand person and the only one out of the three who's not in. What is going on? Anyhow, don't get me started. No, thank you very much for having me. You know, it was great because originally I thought I'd be away this weekend, but I didn't make the cut for this one talk, no big deal. But then Peter hit me up. I was like, oh, dude, I'm totally down. Because I will say this, SF HTML5, I think is one of the greatest meetups. Absolutely. And this is coming from someone who organizes meetups. I realize how challenging it is to get these things organized on a timely basis, on a monthly basis, getting speakers all the time. So I hope you do appreciate the blood, sweat, and not so many tears that goes into running a meetup like this, and as well being this well attended constantly, I think is fantastic. So shout outs to Peter and shout outs to SFHTML5. So that being said, hello. My name is Henri, and that is the pronunciation, if you can say it. Henri, I'll answer to that. I even answer to Henry, if you have a hard time with the throat stuff with the R. This is my Twitter handle. It is my Instagram handle as well, but it's not my real last name. It's just something, it was a nom de plume, as we like to say in French. And, you know, stage name, people used to ask me so much if it was my real last name. I said, no, it's not. And they would get up and leave. So I'm happy you're still here. That being said, I am from the greatest city on the planet, which is Toronto. It's in Canada. If you've never been, come check us out. The US dollar goes pretty far, so you're going to have extra fun. I'm a freelance developer in Toronto. I tend to hang around the web performance space, so whether it be being at a conference or speaking at a conference about performance. I also run a couple meetups in Toronto. One is the web performance meetup, and the other one is one that has to do with performance just a little. And in my spare time, I run. I'm a big fan of the 5K. I don't do marathons. I think it's a little too tough on the body. But I tend to share my runs online lately using this hashtag #devswhorun. And I do that simply because I'd like to see more developers and designers sort of get up and be a little bit more active. We spend a lot of time at our computers. We watch TV on them. We do whatever we do for work and all that stuff. So I think it'd be great to get out and run. That being said, like I said, that's my Twitter handle. If you want to hit me with some hate tweets, I'm good. I'll still reply. That being said, welcome to this presentation. I'm calling this Moving Pictures, and it's a snapshot at the future of web media, specifically. Now, the Rush fans know exactly what's going on here. Any fans of Rush here? Only a few of you? Okay, this is a spoof on a Rush album cover. I just thought it was a very apropos title, so you can look that up if you'd like. But since only 3 of you saw that, it kind of landed off. So really, I'm going to get going. So this story, and it is a story, I'm a bit of a raconteur. So this story is literally about the internet. And it started specifically February 1993, in Illinois, specifically at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, NCSA as it's well known. And this was around the time where Mosaic was being developed, worked on, or had been developed very early. And there was an email exchange. And they were talking about introducing a new HTML tag, because there were just about 12.5 tags at the time, and it was the image tag, IMG. And the email read like this, actually. I'd like to propose a new optional HTML tag, IMG, image. And that was from Mark Andreessen. That's the time and date stamp on the actual email. Now, images. Well, we knew, well, looking back, we knew that that was an important email, because if you think about where images are right now, you know, it's almost unthinkable that the web would have no images. But at the time, it was very sort of academic platform, you know, all text. And in fact, it started as an academic platform. But there was a proposal to have images introduced. And believe it or not, there was a little bit of pushback. Tim Berners-Lee actually was not a huge fan of the idea of having images. And they had sort of discussed that. But Mark Andreessen believed at the time that images would probably push the web forward. He thought that there'd be a lot of ingenuity by introducing inline images. And this is despite the fact that he knew that at some point there might be, you know, as he sort of said, some yahoos who would come online and maybe give us some of that unsavory content. But, and glad to say that, you know, that never happened. But what we do know is that the image tag was mostly widely revered when it was introduced. The idea of having images on a web page pleased a lot of people, designers and users of the web at the time. So in 1995, HTML 2.0 images, the image tag was introduced, or included, pardon me. Now, since we are going to talk about future media, it'd be tough for me to not talk about what transpired after that. And we're going to go through and cycle through some of the formats that came about. Now, however you want to call this, GIF or GIF, whatever it is, that came around. And I want to point out the fact that I'm going to say it, GIF, because I usually say GIF, I'm sorry. The GIF is 33 years old, or just under 33, actually. So it is a bit long in the tooth. And feature-wise, what do we have? We know it's a lossless format, 256 colors, because at the time, that's all we needed. There was also, not alpha, but there was transparency available, so that was actually kind of cool. But somehow the GIF has survived, and we mostly know why. A lot of the animated GIFs, as we call them, because a lot of them are not GIFs at this point, became a bit more popular again. So the GIF is still around. The PNG. Now, the PNG was also introduced some time ago, 23 years, in fact. Now, if you really think about it, for those who know a little bit of history about the PNG, it came about through a patent dispute, and that's actually going to be very important in this conversation tonight. And so the ping came about in part because of a patent dispute. And but now at this point we had more colors available. We also had better bit rates. What are colors available? Oh yes, it was a lossless format. Lossy to an extent now because of some computing power that came about. But the one thing about the ping was that it also provided some transparency in the form of an alpha channel at this point. Like I said, lossless, but still a little popular. But that was 23 years ago. Then came the workhorse, the JPEG. Now, believe it or not, the JPEG is actually 27 years old, which kind of strikes me. But this became the sort of de facto standard for images. Now, specifically for photography, it was a lossy format as well, which the internet started to need because of the amount of images that came on. Bandwidth was not gangster at the time. So these are things that made the JPEG very popular, and still is to this very day. And the JPEG has many variants. You know, we could go through like the XR, the 2000, and so many more that are still present to this day. But the one thing about those three formats, if you think about it, one's 33, one's 23, one's 27. Ultimately, they're about as old as the Rolling Stones. And you know, these are things that are very important because you're talking about antiquated codecs. And 30 years later, you know, again, computing power is a little different. Codecs are improved. Now, the youngest out of the bunch is the WebP. Apparently some Google people here. And the WebP is 10 years old. Now, the important part about the WebP, and the one thing that I like to remind people, it's actually a format that was really made for the internet. You know, these other formats prior were like, yes, they were image formats, but this specifically was made for the net. So what does that mean? It meant that very aggressive compression. You know, the WebP made things a lot smaller. It was about 30% better, 26% better than a PNG, 25 to 35% smaller than a JPEG. Like I said, very aggressive compression, lossy and lossless were available. Now, the one thing about the WebP also that's very important is that for those that know what chroma subsampling is, it was set at 420, and it was also an 8-bit format. But like I said, at 10 years old, that doesn't seem so old compared to the other formats, but that also, you know, it was in line for possible improvements. Now, another thing that I want to mention, that the WebP, when it was introduced, and I was speaking to a Chrome PM about this, they had the PNG in their sites. They felt that the WebP's features matched the PNGs and were ultimately better. Now, if you start to look at data on the HTTP archive, you're going to see the PNG is still vastly in greater numbers than the WebP online, but that could be a matter of time and also a matter of habits as well. Now, we're talking about compression. And compression is actually going to be a very important topic in this talk. And I like to throw out this little this picture every so often when compression comes up. I found this on Twitter one day, and I thought it was hilarious, so I saved it. That really kind of says it right there. JPEG compression, super important. But how important is compression? Well, so important that they have competitions worldwide. You know, compression is very important when you're talking about data. You're talking about sending things down the wire. And in fact, this is a quote that I like to use quite often as well. This is from a Googler. The foundation of the whole internet is data compression, Colt McCandless. No compression, the internet is not what it is right now. That's without a doubt. You can go through all the files you want. Something at some point has to be, compression has to be involved. Why? Well, you know, bandwidth. It's not, you know, unlimited. These are things that come up from time to time. Costs. Bandwidth costs money. There was a study a while back, I think it was, it might have been Netflix, but they'd realized that, I mean, through looking at some improvements that they wanted to make on performance, I mean, some very simple compression management wasn't handled, and they were wasting a lot of money. Screen resolution has changed over time as well. In fact, from the time some of the older formats were introduced to today, hardware has changed. User habits have changed. Screen resolutions have changed simply because we're not walking around with desktop computers. We're walking around with handhelds. You know, things like DPI is what I want to say. You know, and this is a tweet from a Akamai engineer who was talking about some of the traffic going to his website, but he took a closer look at some of the devices that were coming across his site. And, you know, if you're talking about serving images with this kind of information on hand, there are complications involved. We can go look at some data right here in terms of some of the screen resolutions that you have to deal with. This is a very famous photo that came from open signal, and this was a sort of like a fragmentation of the Android devices out there in the wild. It's things that you have to deal with. Now, let's look at some more information. This is from the HTTP archive, the web almanac that they released late last year, pardon me. Actually, they released it during Chrome Dev Summit, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, the median of bytes on a page at a meg, but you're looking at P90, almost 5. These are things that are very important. And this is on mobile, by the way. And if you start to look at image formats on a page, and again, you can see overwhelmingly the JPEG is the one that's the most present, with the PNG, WebP coming in right behind it. Now, I'm going to talk about all 4 of these, but the SVG not so much because I'm going to talk about raster images. So in order, you're looking at the JPEG, which is the most prevalent, PNG, WebP, the GIF, and the SVG. But seeing that JPEGs are the most abundant format, they'll also provide the most abundance in savings. So that's why I'd like to introduce you to a format being developed called the JPEG XL. Now, has anyone heard of this, even like remotely? Amazing. I can just lie the rest of the day. We're gonna have fun. But we will have fun. So let's talk about the JPEG XL. So how did this come about? Well, a couple of years ago, it more or less turned 25. And to celebrate, the committee thought that they'd put out a call for papers to look at potentially improving the JPEG. Like I said, a little long in the tooth. It was 27 years old. Well, it's 27 years old today. So they had this call made. There were 7 submissions. 2 were selected. And the 2 were from these other formats in sort of development. One called PIC and one called FWIF. FWIF, right? I think it means something in Dutch. I might have to ask Peter. But the free universal image format was one that was being developed by Cloudinary. And the PIC format is one that was being developed by Google. Both specifically, PIC, in fact, had the JPEG in mind. Because, again, they felt that the JPEG was a little old, long in the tooth, old technology, they might be able to do something to replace it. So what ended up happening, these 2 these 2 submissions were selected and they joined forces to create what would be the JPEG XL. Now, the JPEG XL ultimately, and I'm going to put the list up, was going to address issues with modern resource delivery and just sort of images, how images should really be in 2020 and beyond. So what do we have here? Obviously, a JPEG or modern image format should have an alpha channel, something that the JPEG did not, although variants did. The JPEG 2000 had it. The XR, I can't remember offhand, but for sure the 2000. But alpha was going to be dealt with for sure. Now, obviously, the JPEG was first introduced as a lossy format. They were going to have a lossless version of it. Now, I say lossless, it's really actually perceptual lossless. And what I mean by that is the following. Anyone who's familiar with chroma subsampling will know that it has to do with the visual system. What do we believe is lossless and not? So what's going to happen with the JPEG XL is that they will apply more compression on certain parts of the image than others. Now, again, it won't be a true lossless format, but perceptually it will. And that's the point there. Now, we're also going to have modern compression. That's without a doubt. You're not going to use old, long, in-the-tooth codecs for a 2020 format. Obviously, animation is going to be part of the... Okay. That was animation. I'm not sure what happened. So what was I saying? Animation is going to be part of the solution here. I'm not a huge fan of animated images, but the user experience, the user engagement will tell me otherwise. So animation will be part of the solution. The WebP had some animation involved, although not used very often. We know that obviously the GIF hugely favored for its animation. In fact, the PNG also had the aping, which I ran into one recently online. It was brutal because it was huge. But animation has to be part of the conversation. High bit depth, that's without a doubt. I talked about the WebP being stuck at 8-bit. Other images, other image formats were benefiting from greater bit depth, but this JPEG XL will have that as well. I believe right up to 12. Legacy friendly. What's going to happen is that the engineers working on this project, the people from PIC and the people from Cloudinary, are going to make sure that it's going to be backwards compatible. Now, how they're going to set that up, it's kind of almost a separate talk, but I'll be able to provide some links and you'll be able to see that specifically. When they say it's going to be a universal format, it means the following. They believe that the JPEG XL will be able to replace virtually every format that's available right now. So that means that if you want something that, say, the PNG would have been good at, or the GIF, or the SVG, because we know that has particular features that make it unique. They feel that the JPEG XL will be the one to replace it. So ultimately, what they are saying right now is that the JPEG XL will be the one to serve all your needs. And lastly, what I'd like to say is that they plan on the JPEG XL to be responsive. Now, again, in 2020, this is something that's going to be absolutely indispensable to have a format that can do that, which is what made the SVG so special for those who sort of do the background check there. Something else I want to mention is that the JPEG XL is also going to be a format that, depending on the size of the image that you need, you'll be able to send that one format down, because they plan on giving you, say, you need a thumbnail, well, they'll send part of the image down that will fit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't want to spend too much time on it because there are some other things that I do want to discuss, but these are things that they thought about, and I want you to think about as well in terms of like what the pain points were on raster images. JPEG XL is apparently here to save the day. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to put up the information for this chart. Okay. This had to do with something I'm going to come back and talk about. I'm terribly sorry. But now, we cannot talk about the future of the web and the media and the formats without talking about video. Video has become largely, again, extremely important in how, in user experience, user engagement. And if you look at some of the companies that are out there that you deal with on a daily basis, some of the platforms that you deal with on a daily basis, there's a ton of video being dispensed. Netflix, Instagram, the stories, TikTok. Hey, I'm not a TikTok fan, but whatever, you know. What's that new one? Byte, you know. And they got bit, if you saw the news. But video is extremely important in the platform of the web as we speak. Now, I'm going to take a quick minute to mention this. You know, I don't even have to say anything. But Flash was largely very important in the development of video online. You know, whether your fan went crazy or not, Flash was extremely important. And, you know, for the fans, we'll be celebrating an end of life later on this year, December 31st, 2020. A bunch of companies have announced it, and they've actually announced it as well. But for the historians in the room, does this date ring a bell? This is actually going to be the 10th year anniversary of the Steve Jobs letter. Thank you. You're very welcome. For those who remember the letter, that set Adobe ablaze, and a huge fight took place online afterwards, or in the papers, in fact. You know, large, full-page, you know, rebuttals were going by before Twitter. So this is actually a big deal. So I just wanted to mention that. But what I will come back and say, and to get back to my point, look at some of the bytes on a page. Media versus other. P90, 91%. You could take out the images, and it'll still be a large number here. So video is a very important part of the future of media on the web. And I'll bring back Colt's quote again. We have to use the best-in-class compression to try to make sure that things are as smooth as possible online. Now let's look at some quick information here. Globally, video traffic will be 82% of all traffic, both business and consumer, by 2022, up from 75% in 2017. Let's look at something else, since you know, I feel this is very apropos for the weekend. Since 2017, traditional linear TV viewership of the Super Bowl is down 14%, while digital streaming increased by 200% from 1.3 to 2.6 million. And that was from a blog post I read, I think, with Google. Now, if you think about that, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Think of your friends who watch sports or watch whatever else that's taking place online these days. I think the Picard episode, the first one, is going to be streamed. Guaranteed they're going to get a huge audience. But this has been starting, actually, from time. Who has heard of YouTube and specifically this Feather sort of project that they had? So what this was about, and this was about 10 years ago, in fact, an engineer had been tasked, who was working at YouTube at the time, had been tasked to work on the landing page because, I mean, his boss was like, it's too big, it's coming in too heavy, you know, we're aggravated by this, whatever. So he was given the project, he went home, started to work on it, and he had a plan in mind. To have it come in at under 100K. Boom, boom, boom. Starts working on it, finally gets it down to 98. Super excited. They deploy, they launch, everything's cool. Oh man, it's gonna be awesome. But a bunch of fires took place. Why? Because the site was still slow. The analytics were coming back and they couldn't believe what was going on because they went from 1.2 meg to sub 100 and still things weren't going right. Well, ultimately, here's what happened. They had created a path to access to YouTube because some people in certain markets had never been able to tap in because they had poor bandwidth, you know, inexpensive devices that just, you know, tapped out. But suddenly, these same users were getting a glimpse, just a few frames of the video, and that was enough for them to wait sometimes as much as 20 minutes. This is something that, and he actually was supposed to be here tonight, but he emailed me saying that he got caught up. But this essentially was something that informed him about compression, making sure that resources can come down the wire as much as possible. In 2020, we're doing the exact same thing because there's so much video coming down the pipe now that this is something that has to be a P1 if you're going to serve video. Priority 1, by the way. So let's start to look at quickly the video landscape. By far, H.264 is the one that you're going to see the most of. That's without a doubt. It's been around since 2003, and it's the one that is the most prevalent. Now, H.265 is also around, HEVC. I'm going to get into the challenges that that provides, but that also provided some improved compression there, naturally. Then you have the VP8, VP9, and I should have put a little asterisk, but I gave it a darker color in case you can't see. VP10, that came from Google. That was an open source project. Now, what's happening in 2020 that would constitute as the future of web media? Who has heard of AV1 here? Okay, we have a couple people. I feel like I'm teaching everyone stuff tonight, and I feel so good about that. So thank you. My parents were both educators. They'd be so happy to watch me right now. AV1 is a format that it's been out about 3 years now, but still somewhat, I don't want to say in an experimental phase, but slowly being adopted. Now, it came about from a group of companies who came together and created the Alliance for Open Media. Why is it called the Alliance for Open Media? One of the challenges with formats over the years have been patents. They have hampered the development or the advancement of formats. I talked about bandwidth and cost. You know, double entendre, costs also from the patent issues. Pardon me? Absolutely. Okay. Yes. So that has been one of the challenges in dealing with formats. So this was very important. This was essentially going to be, I'm actually going to compare it to, did I mention it? I'm going to compare it to the JPEG XL, which is also actually going to, by the way, going to be open source. This was a meeting of minds coming together to say, hey, let's all come together and work on this and create some of these open source patent-free formats. Now, this is a group of the founding companies of the Alliance. And I'm putting them in a separate page from the others that I'm going to show right now, because they apparently have sort of like slightly different. I mean, they have voting, you know, group votes, voting rights that are like different from the other group right here. Which, whoops, sorry. And this is the promoter members. Again, companies that are here to support this project. Now, why is this important? Well, like I said, video, hugely popular. Let's start with YouTube. 1 billion hours of YouTube watched per day. 500 hours of YouTube content uploaded, well, sorry, I really can't spell, uploaded per minute. And 70% of the traffic is mobile. Now keep that in mind. You think about some of the challenges of just working with the codecs and whatnot and all the content, but what if the majority of your viewers are on mobile devices? These things are very important. Now, YouTube obviously has a range of videos. Some are being watched much more than others, so they start to apply compression differently depending on the popularity of the video. So these are things that they have to think about. And again, you know what I mean, that's an enormous amount of bandwidth they have to deal with. Now, I'm not a Twitch person, but I see what they do. And that's streaming. extremely important to them: bandwidth, cost, and modern codecs. Now let's look at some Twitch data. This number is so big I can't even say it. Those are the hours of Twitch in December that were viewed. The amount of concurrent viewers in December as well. That's actually more than the people in San Francisco. I have to check that out myself. And that's mostly desktop. So again, these are sort of, it's like an exact science. Many variables in that equation that they have to deal with. So now let's get back to the idea of the AV1 and the codec. It was a codec that was mostly developed by the union of 3 companies here and their efforts. Okay, sorry, I just saw a sign here. So getting back to the VP10 and the asterisk I put next to it, they had been developing the VP8, VP9, VP10 came around, and right around the time that the AOM was organized, so they folded their efforts of the VP10 into AV1. Also, Mozilla, who's always been a fan of open source, they had been working on their codec as well, and so was Cisco, who was, again, very much behind this project. So the 3 got together, and they started to work on the AV1 codec. Now, with anything new, there are always going to be some challenges. Like, for example, when the WebP was first introduced, there was a world of challenges there. But 10 years later, these things have been smoothed out. So now, with AV1 being fairly new, there are some challenges, mostly based around complexity. This is the kind of challenge that the WebP first had when it was introduced, again, 10 years ago. CPU intensive, and a bunch of other things that didn't make it a favorable format. But again, with time, things changed. YouTube, in their deployment of the AV1, which is currently happening, so if you want to know, especially if you've been watching YouTube videos on Chrome or anything, or I'd say Chrome, I believe nightly for sure, but I'm not sure about Firefox Stable, but I'll get into that in a second. They actually have run into a few challenges there. Things like noticing that some of their users were on very old devices. And this is the kind of data that came out afterwards because they could see exactly what was going on. Now, this also informed them, and they start to serve different videos with different codecs depending on the size of the video, the resolution, things like that. Facebook is experimenting with the AV1, and right now, from what I understand, they're keeping it at a resolution of 720p max and a length of the video at 5 minutes as well. But this is probably soon to change with time as things get a little better with some of the encoders. Now, any video engineers here? Okay. Any others? A few? Okay. Because I'd love to talk to you afterwards, because wow, reading the white papers on the AV1 and stuff like that, it's like, whew, you guys do brilliant work. I have to say that much. But it definitely has to do ultimately with frame compression and the one thing I did recognize when I was starting to read some of the details is the transforms, specifically because I was familiar with the language, with the JPEG, DCT, and the AV1. And I'm going to provide some links on the slides that I provide afterwards. But the AV1 had 16 possible transforms, which I thought was a little crazy. But again, these are very heavy technical details. Ultimately, everything here is to make the AV1 as small and performant as possible. Now, in terms of a timeline, and we are right down here right now. Oh, it says so. In case you couldn't read like I can. They feel, and I have a separate timeline that's going, oh, maybe I don't. It's definitely going to improve, especially this year. They believe that we're going to go from a software to a hardware decoding possibility later on this year. As per the papers I've provided, they're saying 2020 roughly. But this is what they're hoping to see happen in the next few years, if not sooner. So we're going to get some hardware decoding and upwards eventually some devices, especially on the low-end devices, because that's where we're going to be able to see a lot of impact. I mentioned that it was available in Firefox nightly for sure, because you'll see this in behind a flag. You'll see that it's actually turned on. And in YouTube, if you ever go down, I'm a big YouTube, I consume a lot of YouTube content. You'll see that you're able to pick, take a look at your AV1 settings, because again, they'll serve that to you as long as you ask for it. Now, I'm going to round it out to talk about something like this, which is called the AVIF. Hands up if you heard any rumblings. Awesome. And again, this is very much a discussion about what is coming down the pipe. So the AVIF is basically the AV1 file format as an image. I'm missing a word in there. I should have said AV1 image file format. That may sound odd, but it's actually not, because the WebP is actually coming from video, because it's a still frame from the video. And so is the HEIF format. If you remember a few years ago, Apple was, yada, 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 we're introducing this HEIF format, this HEIF format, this HEIF format. And that came from the HEVC video as well. So this is nothing unusual to create an image file format from video. And this one, it's going to have basically some of the best features that come from the AV1 video format. So 8, 10, 12-bit, lossy and lossless, alpha channel, chroma subsampling at 420, 422, and 444. And also, it's going to be HDR capable. Now, this is actually from a talk that took place actually here around the AV1 ecosystem. And this is just to show you, give you an idea of some of the savings that are going to be possible with the AVIF, which is what it's called. Now, from a JPEG that was set at 420 and the low-res image Kodak test set, which is actually kind of cool, you should download it. But you can see what's happening with the WebP, obviously some savings. The JPEG 2000, again, that's never been an argument, so it's been a format that gave you some savings, but it was lossless. And also, it just didn't have like the best adoption. Obviously, only Apple. HEIF, also that provided tons of savings, but again, restricted by patent. AVIF, patent-free, great savings. And again, this is going to be a continuation of what's happening with the AV1 video format as well. Now, with regards to support for that, it's being worked on as we speak. This could be landing in Chrome very soon. That being said, since Mozilla is also kind of behind this, I wouldn't be surprised if this landed in Firefox fairly soon as well. And when you mentioned Chrome. Obviously, these things are going to mean Microsoft Edge now as well, and potentially a few people who are part of the Chromian family. So, let's talk about the future, because we just went through some very early stage discussions about some formats that are coming down the pipe. Some, again, that are being used right now. AV1 is being served as we speak. The AVIF, actually, I forgot to mention, is actually being supported by Windows 10. One of the few times I've actually wanted a PC. Paint, I believe, is supporting it. But you'll see that some other, I think, is it GIMP? I think their next push is going to have support for AVIF, and I'm thinking of a few other things too. But let's talk about the future. Believe it or not, there's going to be more development. WebP2 is being worked on as we speak. Probably greater bit depths, likely because at 8, they're kind of like here. They might go to 10, 12. I'll have to double check, but I know for sure that's being worked on as we speak. AV2, believe it or not, is being worked on as we speak right now, which feels so premature. But some believe that the video format should be on this kind of like 5-year cycle, where it's kind of like, boom, it's been introduced 1 year, 5 years later, we should have some semblance of an improvement. So AV2 is something that's being worked on. So with that being said, I just want to give everyone tonight, even though this is not going to be the kind of information that you'll be able to run home and sort of like, okay, let me see if I can just get this AVIF to load right away and deploy, and you're going to use with some of your clients. But I just want to give everyone sort of like overview of the things that are being worked on in the background. I mean, while we're here having Grey Poupon, you know, some meats and cheese and whatnot, and there's some engineers who are like hammering away to try to get these formats smaller, fit into tighter spaces, and hopefully we'll be able to use them and make the web as accessible as possible. And with that being said, I just want to thank everyone for listening, and merci.